My wealthy uncle took me in after my parents abandoned me at 13. 15 years later they showed up smirking. They sat in that mahogany-paneled conference room on Fifth Avenue like vultures circling roadkill. My parents, Linda and Frank Morrison, the same two people who drove me to a gas station in Riverside when I was 13 and told me to wait in the bathroom while they grabbed some snacks. That was 15 years ago. The snacks never came, and neither did they. Now here they were, wearing their Sunday best, Mom in a navy Nordstrom blazer she probably bought on credit, Dad in a suit that didn't quite hide the beard he'd cultivated over the years. They kept glancing at each other with these sick little grins, like they were sharing some private joke. They thought they knew exactly why we were all gathered in Patterson and Associates law firm on this crisp October morning. I sat across from them in the leather chair my Uncle Benjamin had taught me to appreciate, real Italian leather, he used to say, not that synthetic garbage. I didn't smile back at their smugness. I just watched, calm as still water, because I knew something they didn't. I knew what was written in that will sitting in the manila folder on Mr. Patterson's desk. And I knew that in about 10 minutes, the color was going to drain from their faces like water down a sink. When they abandoned me at that Chevron station in Riverside, it wasn't some dramatic scene from a Lifetime movie. No screaming, no tears, no we'll come back for you, sweetheart. Just a promise to return in 20 minutes that stretched into forever. I waited there until the manager, a kind woman named Rosa, found me sleeping against the slushy machine the next morning. She gave me a ham sandwich and called the police. That's when Uncle Benjamin showed up. Not my parents, they were nowhere to be found. But Benjamin Morrison, my father's older brother, came striding into that police station like he owned the place. He was wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit and carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my parents' monthly rent. He didn't ask a lot of questions. Didn't demand explanations or curse my parents' names, though God knows they deserved it. He just looked at me, really looked at me, like I was worth something, and said, "Rebecca, you're coming home with me." His brownstone on the Upper West Side became my sanctuary. For the first time in my life, I had my own room, my own bed, books to read, and someone who actually gave a damn whether I ate breakfast. Uncle Benjamin was everything my parents weren't: steady, reliable, present. He taught me things they never could: how to appreciate good wine, how to read the stock market, how to carry myself with dignity. But most importantly, he taught me patience. Patience, Rebecca, he'd say while we played chess in his study, is more powerful than any weapon. The right moment always comes to those who wait for it. I never heard from Linda and Frank. Not a phone call, not a birthday card, not even a Christmas text. For 14 years, they were ghosts, and I convinced myself I preferred it that way. Then Uncle Benjamin got sick, and suddenly, like sharks sensing blood in the water, they remembered they had a daughter. The first sign came on a Tuesday in March. I was in Uncle Benjamin's study, helping him organize his medications. The cancer was winning by then, though he'd never admit it, when I heard the mail slot clatter downstairs. Among the usual bills and catalogs was something that made my blood freeze, a greeting card with "Thinking of you" written in gaudy gold script. Inside, in my mother's familiar looping handwriting, "Dearest Rebecca, we've been thinking about you so much lately. We miss you terribly. Love always, Mom and Dad." No return address. No explanation for 14 years of silence. Just this pathetic attempt at reconnect ion that fooled absolutely no one. Uncle Benjamin found me staring at the card in the kitchen. He was wearing his burgundy robe, the one from Brooks Brothers that I'd bought him for his 65th birthday, and his face was gaunt from the chemo, but his eyes were still sharp as cut glass. "They've resurfaced," he said quietly, glancing at the card. "How did you know?" He smiled, but it wasn't warm. "Your father called the house last week. 3 times. I didn't pick up, but the caller ID doesn't lie. Frank Morrison, calling from a Phoenix number." He poured himself coffee with hands that shook slightly. "They've been keeping tabs on us, sweetheart. Probably hired some 2-bit private investigator to track you down." The calls started the next week. My phone would buzz with Arizona numbers I didn't recognize. I never answered, but they left messages. Mom's voice, saccharine and false: "Honey, it's your mother. We know we have so much to talk about, but we love you and we want to make things right." Dad's voice, gruffer but trying to sound paternal: "Rebecca, it's time we all sat down as a family. We've made mistakes, but we're ready to fix them." Fix them. As if abandoning your 13-year-old daughter at a gas station was just some minor error, like forgetting to return a library book. Uncle Benjamin grew sicker through the spring, but his mind stayed razor-sharp. We'd sit in Central Park during his good days, feeding pigeons and watching joggers circle the reservoir, and he'd tell me stories about my father as a young man. Frank was always looking for shortcuts, he'd say, tossing breadcrumbs to a particularly bold pigeon. Even as kids, he wanted the reward without doing the work. I used to bail him out of trouble constantly. Gambling debts, bad business deals, that disastrous marriage to your mother. He looked at me meaningfully. I stopped when he proved he couldn't be trusted with what mattered most. Me, I said. You. He squeezed my hand. But I want you to know something, Rebecca. I've been watching them all these years. Tracking their moves, their finances, their schemes. They're broke. Living in a double-wide trailer outside Phoenix, drowning in debt. They're not calling because they miss you. I already knew that, but hearing it confirmed still stung. They're calling because they know I'm dying, and they think there's money involved. His grip tightened. And sweetheart, they're not wrong about that. Uncle Benjamin's final months were a masterclass in strategic planning. Between his chemotherapy appointments at Mount Sinai and our quiet evenings in his study, he was orchestrating something beautiful and terrible. Estate planning isn't just about money, Rebecca, he explained one evening, surrounded by legal documents and manila folders. His lawyer, Charles Patterson, a silver-haired gentleman who'd been handling the Morrison family affairs for 30 years, sat across from us with his gold-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. It's about sending a message that lasts long after you're gone. I was learning things I'd never imagined. Trusts and holdings, offshore accounts, and property deeds. Uncle Benjamin owned more than I'd realized, not just the Upper West Side brownstone where we lived, but a beach house in the Hamptons, a cabin in Vermont, and investment properties scattered across Manhattan. His stock portfolio alone was worth millions. Your parents have been busy, Patterson informed us during one of our meetings, sliding a folder across the mahogany desk. 3 attempts to contact the firm directly, claiming to be concerned about family matters. Linda even showed up at our reception desk last month, demanding to speak with me about Benjamin's estate planning needs. I felt Uncle Benjamin's hand tense on his coffee mug. What did you tell them? Exactly what I tell all unauthorized inquiries, that client confidentiality prevents me from discussing anything without explicit written permission from the client himself. But the harassment escalated. They started showing up at places they shouldn't have known about. Mom appeared at the corner Starbucks where I got my morning coffee, wearing a cheap floral dress and too much makeup, her smile desperate and fake. Rebecca, honey, look at you. You're so grown up, so beautiful. She reached for my arm with fingers yellowed from cigarettes. We need to talk, sweetheart. Really talk. There's so much to explain, so much you don't understand about why we had to make the choices we did back then. I pulled away without a word, left my latte on the counter, and walked straight to the exit. Through the window, I watched her face crumple into something ugly and entitled. Dad tried a different approach. He waited outside the organic market on Columbus Avenue where I shopped for Uncle Benjamin's special dietary requirements. Lung cancer had made him particular about food, and I'd learned to find the freshest vegetables, the best cuts of fish. Rebecca. His voice was rougher than I remembered, probably from years of Marlboro Reds. You can't keep ignoring us forever. We're family. Family doesn't abandon children at gas stations, I said quietly, not even pausing in my walk toward the subway entrance. We were young. We made mistakes. But we're here now, trying to make things right. I stopped and turned to face him fully. He looked older, smaller somehow. The intimidating figure from my childhood had become just a sad, middle-aged man in a wrinkled polo shirt. You're not here for me, I said. You're here for whatever you think Uncle Benjamin is going to leave behind. And that tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. His face flushed red, but I was already disappearing down the subway steps. Uncle Benjamin passed on a Sunday morning in September, with autumn light streaming through his bedroom windows and my hand holding his. His last words weren't dramatic or profound, just a whispered thank you, sweetheart, that broke my heart into a million pieces. The funeral at St. Bartholomew's Cathedral was packed. Uncle Benjamin had touched more lives than I'd realized. Business associates, charity board members, neighbors from the building who'd known him for decades. I stood at the podium in my black Armani dress, one he'd insisted on buying me the year before, and delivered a eulogy that focused on the man who'd saved me, not the fortune he'd left behind. Linda and Frank had the audacity to show up. They sat in the back row wearing ill-fitting black clothes, probably borrowed or bought at some discount store. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, performing grief she'd never earned the right to feel. Dad kept checking his phone, as if Uncle Benjamin's funeral was just another appointment on his calendar. They tried to approach me during the reception at the Plaza Hotel afterward. I was accepting condolences from Uncle Benjamin's longtime friends when I felt a hand on my shoulder. "Rebecca, honey, we're so sorry for your loss." Mom's voice was sticky with false sympathy. Benjamin was, well, he was a good man. A generous man. I turned slowly, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room on us. These people knew my story. Uncle Benjamin had never hidden the truth about how I'd come to live with him. "Yes," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the marble-floored room. He was the kind of man who takes in abandoned children without asking questions. The kind of man who gives love unconditionally. The kind of man who knows the difference between family and DNA. Mom's face went white. Dad stepped forward, probably trying to salvage the situation. "We know there are misunderstandings that need to be cleared up," he said, his voice low but urgent. "But we're family, Rebecca. We need to stick together during this difficult time. Work together on practical matters." Practical matters. Even at a funeral, they couldn't hide their true motivations. "The will reading is Thursday at 2 o'clock, I said calmly. "Patterson and Associates on Fifth Avenue. If you have any legal standing in this matter, I'm sure Mr. Patterson will explain it to you then." I walked away, leaving them standing there like the parasites they were. That Thursday morning, I dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit Uncle Benjamin had given me for my 27th birthday. Before leaving for the lawyer's office, I stopped by his study one last time. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, his chess set mid-game, his reading glasses on the desk beside a half-finished crossword puzzle, his favorite fountain pen lying across a leather journal filled with his neat handwriting. I picked up the pen and held it for a moment, feeling its weight. Uncle Benjamin had taught me so much about patience, about timing, about waiting for the right moment to act. Today, I thought, was going to be the right moment. The conference room at Patterson and Associates felt like a theater stage set for the final act of a long-running drama. The afternoon sun slanted through tall windows, casting everything in golden light that should have been peaceful but instead felt charged with electricity. I arrived first, taking my seat at the polished conference table with the composure Uncle Benjamin had spent years teaching me. My hands were steady, my breathing even. I'd been preparing for this moment my entire adult life, even if I hadn't realized it. Linda and Frank arrived 10 minutes later, and I had to suppress a laugh at their obvious attempts to look respectable. Mom was wearing what looked like a discount store version of a business suit, complete with shoulder pads that went out of style in the 1990s. Dad had squeezed himself into a navy blazer that strained across his belly, his tie knotted too tight around his neck. But their clothes weren't what caught my attention. It was their faces. The barely contained excitement, the way they kept glancing at each other like conspirators sharing a secret. They thought they knew how this was going to go. They'd probably spent the last few days planning how to spend their windfall. "Rebecca, sweetheart," Mom said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth as they took seats across from me. "You look beautiful. Benjamin would be so proud." I didn't respond. I just watched them fidget and preen, these two people who'd convinced themselves they deserved a piece of a fortune they'd never earned. Charles Patterson entered at exactly 2 o'clock, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the same serious expression he'd worn at every meeting over the past few months. He nodded professionally at all of us before taking his seat at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming," he said, opening his briefcase and withdrawing a thick folder. "We're here for the reading of Benjamin Morrison's last will and testament, executed on August 15th of this year." Dad leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped on the table. Mom straightened in her chair, trying to look solemn but failing to hide the greed in her eyes. Patterson adjusted his glasses and began reading in his precise, measured voice. The opening paragraphs were standard legal language: declarations of sound mind, revocations of previous wills, appointment of executor. But then came the meat of it. "I, Benjamin Morrison, being of sound mind and body, do hereby distribute my earthly possessions as follows." The inventory was staggering, even to me. The brownstone alone was worth $4 million. The Hampton house, another $2 million. The Vermont cabin, the investment properties, the stock portfolio, the the art collection, the vintage wine cellar. It kept going and going, a litany of wealth that made Mom's breathing grow shallow and Dad's face flush with anticipation. The total estate, Patterson continued, valued at approximately $12.7 million, shall be distributed as follows. This was it. The moment of truth. I could practically hear my parents' heartbeats from across the table. Patterson's voice never wavered as he delivered the words that would change everything. I leave my entire estate, all properties, investments, accounts, and personal effects, to my beloved niece, Rebecca Morrison, who has been the daughter I never had. The silence that followed was deafening. The transformation was instantaneous and brutal. Dad's confident smile didn't just fade, it shattered, like glass hitting concrete. His face went from flushed anticipation to bone-white shock in the span of a heartbeat. Mom's mouth actually fell open, a small, strangled sound escaping her throat. That can't be right, she whispered, her manicured fingers gripping the edge of the conference table. There must be some mistake. Patterson continued reading, his voice steady and professional. To those who abandoned their child when she needed them most, I leave nothing. Blood relation does not constitute family. Rebecca has been my true daughter in every way that matters, and she deserves every blessing I can provide. The words hung in the air like a verdict from on high. I sat perfectly still, letting the magnitude of the moment wash over me. $12.7 million. Properties across 3 states. A future I'd never dared to dream of. But more than that, vindication. Justice. The kind of poetic comeuppance Uncle Benjamin had always appreciated. This is insane. Dad's voice cracked as he shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. We're his family. We're Rebecca's parents. You can't just, we have rights. Patterson removed his glasses and cleaned them methodically, a gesture I recognized as his way of maintaining composure in difficult situations. Mr. Morrison, he said quietly, I assure you that this will was executed in accordance with all applicable laws. Mr. Benjamin Morrison was of sound mind and under no duress when he made these decisions. The document is ironclad. Mom was crying now, ugly tears that streaked her cheap mascara down her cheeks. Rebecca, honey, you can't let this happen. We're your family. We made mistakes, yes, but we're here now. We love you. For the first time since they'd walked into the room, I spoke. You love my inheritance, I said quietly. You love the idea of money you never earned, houses you never lived in, investments you never made. But you don't love me. You never did. That's not true. Mom's voice was desperate, reaching across the table as if to grab my hands. We were young, we were scared, we didn't know how to handle. You were 28 and 30 when you left me at that gas station, I interrupted, my voice growing stronger. I'm 28 now. I know exactly how old you were because I've done the math every year on my birthday. You weren't children. You were adults who made a choice. Patterson slid the inheritance documents across the table to me. Page after page of legal language that translated to one simple truth. Everything Uncle Benjamin had built, everything he'd earned, everything he'd loved was now mine. I signed each document slowly, deliberately. With every signature, I could feel my parents' desperation growing thicker in the room. We can contest this, Dad said, his voice hollow but determined. We'll get lawyers. Real lawyers. This isn't over. I looked up from the papers and met his eyes directly. Uncle Benjamin anticipated that, I said. Every trust, every clause, every possible legal challenge, it's all been accounted for. You can spend whatever money you have left fighting this, but you'll lose. And you'll end up with even less than nothing. The silence that followed my words was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. It was the silence of defeat, of dreams crumbling, of chickens coming home to roost after 15 long years. Mom tried one last desperate gambit, her voice breaking as she whispered, We're family, Rebecca. Please. I stood up slowly, smoothing my skirt, and looked down at these 2 people who'd given me life but never love, who'd provided DNA but never devotion. You remembered that too late, I said. Her face crumpled completely then, all pretense of dignity abandoning her. Dad's hands were shaking as he reached for his phone, probably already planning to call whatever cut-rate lawyer they thought they could afford. But I knew something they didn't. Uncle Benjamin had shared the details with me during one of our last conversations, when the morphine was making him unusually talkative about his contingency plans. I've made sure the estate is bulletproof, he told me, his voice weak but his mind still sharp. Every trust has been structured to prevent contest. Every asset has been moved through legal channels they can't touch. Even if they hire Johnny Cochran's ghost, they won't find a crack to exploit. Now, standing in that conference room with my inheritance papers in hand, I felt the full weight of his foresight. Charles Patterson stood as well, extending his hand to me with something that might have been admiration in his professional demeanor. "Congratulations, Miss Morrison," he said. "Your uncle would be very proud." I shook his hand, then walked toward the door. My parents sat frozen in their chairs, pale and trembling, looking like the broken people they'd always been underneath their schemes and illusions. At the doorway, I paused and turned back one final time. "For what it's worth," I said, "Uncle Benjamin never spoke badly about you. Not once in 15 years. He just said you'd made your choice, and choices have consequences." I walked out into the late afternoon sunshine, leaving them to process the wreckage of their expectations. The October air was crisp against my face, carrying the scent of changing leaves and new possibilities. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Kate. "How did it go?" I typed back simply, "Justice served." That evening, I stood in Uncle Benjamin's study, my study now, and opened a bottle of Chateau Margaux 1982 from his wine collection. It had been waiting for the right moment, he'd always said. This felt like the right moment. I raised the glass toward his portrait on the wall, the one where he was smiling that subtle, knowing smile I'd come to love. "Thank you," I whispered. "For everything." They'd abandoned me at 13, betting I'd never amount to anything. At 28, I was worth nearly $13 million. But the real victory wasn't in the money. It was in the knowledge that the man who truly loved me had seen to it that justice was served. The sweetest revenge, I realized, was living well. And I was just getting started.